Hello, how are you? I hope you're having a wonderful day. Welcome to Writing Craft Chat episode 1. This is a series of videos to help authors, myself included, grow in our craft and become stronger writers that tell stronger, more impactful stories. Today's video is all about romantic chemistry. My name is Maddie and I'm a multi-genre author. I went to school for creative writing and I love continuing to grow my skill in the craft and my knowledge of the craft because I do think that writing is one of the most important, art is important just by itself, right? But writing is incredibly important for growing empathy, critical thinking skills, finding escapism, finding hope, learning how to deal with consequences, seeing people live many different lives that you would not otherwise see if you never read or experienced story. So that is why I'm starting this series. I do have a few other craft videos up on my channel, and I do love to vlog my writing journey as well. So if you are interested in those things, then consider subscribing to my channel. I would very much appreciate to see you hang around. I love romantic chemistry. I love when characters fall in love. I may be cynical, but my heart is not made of ice. I do have a romantic streak, and I've always been that way. I loved Disney movies growing up, and I want Disney to make another romance because I don't think they've really made one since Frozen, and Frozen 2 sucked. So yeah, that's that. Even stories that aren't centered around romance, you find that the love people have for each other is so important. And I would love to talk more about familial love or like platonic love. But today I really wanted to focus on romantic chemistry because I do like love, and so you would think that the romance genres or romantasy genres would be right up my alley, but I actually have the hardest time finding books that I really truly enjoy in those genres because I feel like, and the disclaimer, I do not hate any genre like a blanket hate, and while yes, these genres do experience some misogyny because they are geared towards women, that does not exempt these genres from receiving any good faith criticism because that's just not how the world works, right? There are good books and bad books in every single genre. So now we have that out of the way. I feel like a majority of the mainstream books in the romance and romantasy genres just aren't great in terms of character development, character dynamics, character relationships, and there is a lot lacking in them. Instead, these stories have just like cheap tricks to get you to think that these characters might be in love, but sometimes I'm really I just don't feel it. I just feel so disconnected, and it just feels like these characters are supposed to be together, and so they are. And then the story ends, and there's nothing that is moving me or causing me to think or making me feel what they feel. It is just very lazily done. And you may have different opinions. That is fine. But I think that you could probably come up with a few stories in which you feel the characters had a romantic relationship, but it just didn't click for you and it didn't feel real. Their emotions weren't earned, and it just does not make for a very fun, enjoyable reading experience. Have you seen any of the TikToks or Reels where the creator is tier ranking couples, book couples, based off of how likely they are to break up as soon as that last page is over? I can guarantee you can think of some couples like that. And if you are writing, whether you are writing romance as your main genre or subgenre, you do not want people to feel that way, right? You want them to believe in the relationship. So these are my tips for creating relationships that feel grounded, that feel real, and that are going to make people yearn and make people feral over these fake people, right? Tip number 1. Even if your characters are an opposites attract or enemies to lovers situation, they need to have something in common. And while it is totally fine to have like little meaningless things in common, like a favorite color, things like that, they need to have something about their belief in how you should live your life that is the same, that can act as the foundation for a long-lasting relationship. If your goal is just to create a like lust situation and they aren't actually endgame, then that's like, you don't need this commonality. But if you want people to believe that these characters are going to be together forever, they need to have a deep commonality between them. Because think about if you're living your life and you fundamentally believe, let's say you don't want to have children, and you meet someone and they fundamentally, to their core, they want to have children. It's probably not going to work because one of your core values is misaligned with each other, and that's going to lead to tension that is not enjoyable. It's going to lead to friction that leads to resentment, whether you go without children or you do have children. It just doesn't work, right? So no matter what or who your people are, they need to have a similar understanding between their values. And let's say you have the value, even if you're doing a political enemies to lovers, if you have two political figureheads that believe fundamentally they need to take care of their people, but they disagree on how to take care of their people, that's where you can have the tension where fundamentally they have the same goal, right? And that is a good setup for your protagonist and antagonist. It hits the hardest when you have two opposing forces going after the same goal. But the way they go about it, that friction and that tension, that is fun to watch. And that's where you have the space for an ideological shift. That's where you have the space for these characters to spend time together as they try to convince each other of which way is right. Right? And that's exciting. Commonalities are also a great time to use symbolism and subtext in your story as well. If you want to use something that feels more innocuous, find something that represents a larger, deeper theme, that these characters are the same. And that will do some double duty in introducing something small earlier in this text, but it already pushes the idea that these people can work together and that the idea of them together is attractive to the reader. A really good example of this is in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. You know I love that book and I will accept no criticism of it. When Coriolanus and Lucy Gray are talking in the beginning, and it turns out that their favorite dessert is bread pudding. And while that seems small, and it would be small in a contemporary setting, in the world of Panem, it represents something larger. The hunger that they felt, the lack of consistent food, and the lack of access that has shaped their world identities and the way that they move throughout the world in their present circumstances. And while that relationship is obviously doomed, having that similarity pushes the idea of them together into something that is believable. Even though we know how the story is going to end, we want to believe that it might end differently because we see these people fitting together. Number 2, learn the difference between sensuality and sexuality and learn how to leverage them at different points throughout your story. I think this is one of the biggest ones that drives me away from a romance plot, is the lack of sensuality, and it's just kind of pushing the very like physical aspects. And in a romance, you need to have the romance, right? That is integral to the genre. And I think that you need to learn how to use these things, whether or not you are doing a fast burn, slow burn, medium burn, 3/4 burn, whatever, whether you're doing open door, closed door, no door, whatever it is, and whatever these terms will mean to you in their practical applications, they both need to be used. I really don't like Big Mouth, the show, and I hate the animation, but one of the things that sticks to me to this day after I watched the first season was the characters. Like, the women in that show were obsessed with this book where this woman fell in love with like a horseman or something. I can't clearly remember, but the point is they never like had any intimacy or anything, but all the women were saying that it was like so hot. Like, the book was so steamy and swoon worthy because it was everything about the act, or everything around any like physical intimacy is what made it compelling. And I think that that is really good advice if you want to write a romance plot, is learning how to leverage the tension between characters and learning how to explore attraction apart from physical intimacy, right? Because you need the buildup, you need the friction and the tension between these people. So when the catharsis comes, it feels earned. And again, you can have a buildup of tension if you are doing a fast burn with open door scenes, because if you want to have physical intimacy, then you need to slowly build up the emotional intimacy. But you can't have both right away, or you don't have a romance story because there's nothing to build on and there's no catharsis at the end. It's just bland. Like, if I'm going to read about two people who are perfect for each other and they just get together, like, what's the point? That's not fun, right? And then you also take away any space for conflict. You take away any space for characters to have their individual arcs apart from their arc, their relationship arc. And I think you can really explore this where if you are looking through your manuscript and you are seeing just things like character X was so hot, character B was so beautiful, whatever. What does that mean to your character? What does that mean? What is attraction to them? What about the other character is attractive? And this can be physical. This can be how their brain works, how they speak, things that they do, things about them. Like, explore all of these things and what builds that attraction, because that is exciting, right? That's building up the tension, and you want to see where it leads because you understand why this character is just like, oh my God, right? And I feel like just saying this character is hot is also kind of lazy because it takes away because attraction is different for everyone, right? So if you take the time to explore the attraction, you run the risk of someone maybe not finding it attractive. But that should be the fun challenge of it, is saying like, this person who you might not, as the reader yourself might not see the attraction, but you see why character B is so attracted to character A or something like that. And I really hate descriptions where it's like character B had sex hair. Like, what does that mean? And it just is so, it just feels lazy, right? It's just like a cheap, they are attracted to each other. I don't know, without diving into like what it means to have this relationship and build on this relationship and build it into something more. I also think that in sensuality, this is the yearning, this is the pining. And I feel like we're missing this from, I don't read a lot of contemporary romance, but from romantasy books, it's not there. And it's so good. And I feel like the yearning stage is what makes you want it more, because we desire what we don't have. Right? So if you jump right in to these characters working together and having this like perfect relationship, it lessens the desire that the audience has to see them together, right? Because you've given us the catharsis that we're supposed to work toward right away. So it lowers that audience desire. If you want your audience to be just like, losing their minds, you need to have tension and then catharsis. Again, practical applications will look different, but that fundamental building and fall needs to be there. Tip number 3 is pretty similarly aligned with tip number 2 in terms of having buildup and catharsis, and that is to study horror. The horror and romance genres are very similar, and I believe that you do have to be well read to be a good writer. I think it's so arrogant and presumptuous to say that you're going to be a writer and never read and not look to your community to learn and grow. Like, that is not my life. I don't want to be around people like that who don't want to grow in the community and who aren't going to uplift and support other writers when you're trying to get support for writing. Miss me with that. I also think it's very limiting if you only read the genre you write in. There's so many elements that you can pull from other genres to make your story stronger. And limiting yourself to one genre, there's so many good stories out there. And the thing with horror and romance specifically is they are both appealing to some of our most basest emotions, right? Like if you're reading a lit fic, you might be exploring some more high-handed, what it means to be human, the state of humanity. You know, there's a little bit more space for these more ephemeral topics, but being scared, being in love, that is just like the basest form of human emotion, right? Like the majority of people in this world will feel both of those at some point in their life. So you can learn a lot about the building of tension and the release of that tension when you study horror. I saw someone say that horror fundamentally explores the fear between what could happen and the fact that it hasn't happened yet. So, for instance, having no cell service isn't necessarily scary. It might be inconveniencing or annoying, but it's not terrifying. But if you are hiking in the woods, the sun is going down, you're lost, and it's in bear country, and then you have no cell service, that's when it starts to be scary because there are so many possibilities of things that can go wrong, of things that can hurt you, and yet none of them have happened yet. And then you hear a twig snap, and suddenly the possibility of things going wrong, that time has completely lessened. You are like seconds away from something going wrong. And that is terrifying. And then once you see the bear, right, and it starts attacking, it's scary, but in a different way because it's happened and now you're dealing with it. And I think that is pretty much what a romance would be like. Think of falling in love as very much the same way of being terrified. When you're falling in love, you're caught in the space between where you are and where things could be. As you learn someone and start to develop feelings for them, you give them power over you. You give them the power to hurt you. You become more vulnerable. And as your character develops feelings that are more kinder or romantic from friendly, antagonistic, hate, dislike, they become more vulnerable as well. When you don't know how the other person feels, there is the fear that they will reject you and you might lose the relationship entirely if you can't go back to how it is at the baseline. You open yourself up to heartbreak, to shame, and that's scary. That's a terrifying place to be. If you are doing enemies to lovers, when you have two characters falling in love, this is the time when you have an ideological shift. Priorities are shifting. Is the cause more important or is this person more important to me? And that is a lot of space for a lot of tension and conflict as they try to fight against these feelings and not give in because it changes so much of their life. And it is a scary notion. So I really, really think that if you want to write like a romance that will make people obsessed, study horror. And if you study horror, like there's so much to be learned from both of these genres that will make your genre so much stronger. And finally, number 4, let your characters remain themselves even as they're in the relationship. If you have developed very distinct characters, and then as the emotional or physical intimacy ramps up and you kind of leave that behind for this like blank cookie cutter projection of romance, it loses its flavor and it becomes very boring because people have read this scene 100,000 times before. Or they could also just go read it for free on AO3. So let your characters be themselves the whole way through. Of course, your characters can grow more mature, they can change a little bit, but fundamentally, like if you have a grumpy person, are they going to turn into the most happy-go-lucky person ever? Probably not. If you have a very selfish character, are they going to become the most selfless person ever? Probably not. Let them have those moments of grumpiness or selfishness, even as they try to become better versions of themselves for the other character. And also, this is just like a rant, is I do not want to read books where the male character is just like fully developed, has a personality, has goals, opinions, thoughts, and then the female main character is just this like blank slate for the reader to project onto, because it's just not fun anymore. It is just giving Wattpad, like just let women be real people too, and it will still be very enjoyable. I think romance, people are like, well, you're getting the same thing anyway. And it's like, sure, but no. I like roller coasters. And if I go to an amusement park and there's 10 different roller coasters and I ride on all of them, sure, I technically did the same thing 10 times, but each one is different. Maybe one has one loop, one has two loops, one has a vertical incline and a vertical drop. Like, you're experiencing the same thing differently. And I think that's what these genres are about. That's what romance is about as a genre. You know roughly what you're getting into, but the way you're going to experience it with these characters is going to be different every time. And when it stops being different every time and you're just reading the same thing over and over again, it just becomes less fun and it's just stale and it's bland, and your brain is a very powerful thing. You can imagine worlds. So imagine people and let them be unique. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you develop romantic chemistry between characters, or if any of these tips helped you in any way. I wanted to give some tips that weren't necessarily exactly like how to write, because I don't know, sometimes that doesn't always work for my brain, and having a conversation around what makes character chemistry work, it just like clicks a little bit better. It's always good to have options and hear things from different perspectives to find what works for you, what clicks in your brain, so you can write the strongest story possible. I have also opened up manuscript evaluations as a stepping stone to developing editing services. I love getting into the meat of the story, the developmental stages, the line edit stages, and helping people write the strongest story possible, create really engaging characters and conflicts. I'm very excited to be opening up the manuscript evaluations, which is really going to help at the line edit and developmental edit if you don't have the budget, because editing can get very expensive. If you don't have the budget for full dev and line edits, this is a good alternative. And I have 2,000 word samples, just so we can make sure we're a good fit for each other. This is what my degree is in, and I just love developing story and helping people write the strongest stories, learning how to write the strongest stories. So I'm very excited to have this new avenue to open myself up to do that more. Thank you so much for watching this far. Again, I post mostly writing craft videos and vlogs on this channel, so if you'd like to follow along, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, letting me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.